Chapter 1 of Government and Nonprofit Accounting. In Chapter 1, we cover a lot of terminology about what makes government and nonprofit accounting different than accounting for industry and how it's different from business accounting. Some of the main reasons are because they have different purposes in society. So governments their main purpose is to provide services, and nonprofits also. Well, business and industry's main purpose is to generate a profit. Okay, there is no ownership or transferable ownership rights. You can't buy stock in a nonprofit or in a government entity. We have to be accountable to how we use the resources. The number one way that most governments get resources is through taxes and tax collection, where nonprofits often get donors. And so we have to show how we're using the resources provided to us, especially in a government entity that needs to prove that they're using taxpayer dollars effectively. So different types of government. So first, general purpose government. General purpose government are the federal government, state government, cities, towns, township, villages, counties, boroughs, and parishes. So all of the different ways that we can create a town or a residential area become general purpose governments. City government is responsible for maintaining services, roads, etc. within that city. We're going to talk about each one of these. So the federal government gets its own chapter at the end of the book. There will also be some discussion about the federal government and federal government reporting within the general purpose government chapters. And we have special purpose governments, and special purpose governments provide a single or just a few services. These would be K through 12, public schools, public colleges and universities, state hospitals, public hospitals, fire protection, and others. We're going to talk about different special purposes governments and the different accounting processes for those. We'll first focus the first half. 3/4 of the book really focuses on general purpose government and state governments, with some sprinkling of special purpose governments such as fire protection, public hospitals, etc. within that. And then we'll be talking specifically about university accounting in later chapters, and then to nonprofit accounting. And the federal government chapter is the last chapter in the book. Nonprofit organizations. So they're legally separate organizations. They are exempt, usually exempt. There's multiple different kinds of nonprofits. We'll be focusing on 501c nonprofits in this text, but they are generally exempt from federal, state, and local taxation. Characteristics of government organizations. The power rests in the hands of the people. Through elections, we give power to people to run and or manage our government. Most governments are held accountable by a higher government, so city and county governments have to answer to the state. The state has to answer to the federal government, and the federal government has the judicial, executive, and congressional branches which hold each other accountable. Governments have the power to tax. So we can collect taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, special purpose taxes, and we'll talk about all of these different taxes and accounting treatments for them. Nonprofit organizations do not receive repayment, so they provide services for free, no profit motive, absence of transferable ownership rights, again, where we're not buying stock on the stock market. What are the financial reporting standards? So non-governmental and nonprofits use FASB standards. There is some overlap, so if a nonprofit has some governmental relationship, then they use GASB, which is, FASB is the main accounting standards board. This sets standards for business organizations. GASB is just for government organizations, and there is some overlap between the two. And then we have FASAB, which is just the federal government, its agencies and departments. While there is some overlap between general purpose state and local government rules and regulations, the federal government does have its own particular set of rules, regulations, and expectations. As we've said, I don't know why I'm getting a blank screen here. The objectives of financial reporting is mostly accountability. So are we being accountable with our resources? Can we justify raising taxes? Are people going to complain when we raise taxes and say that they don't think we're using our tax money responsibly? Okay. We also have to disclose whether we had sufficient revenues to pay for the current year, or if we're in a deficit. There are rules, so state governments are not allowed to be in a deficit. They have to end the year with a balanced budget, while the federal government is allowed to be in a deficit. That doesn't mean that they have to have enough revenues to pay for the current year's benefits. However, when I say that they can't end in a deficit, it means that they have to find a way to either cut or cover. So it could be that they apply for grants, or they find other funding, or they use savings that they've been setting aside for that in order to generate the funding. And then they look at raising taxes in the future. Okay. What are our financial reports? So we're going to talk a lot more in Chapter 2 about the actual requirements for the individual reports that we have to have, but government financial reports are primarily used to compare actual results with the adopted budget. And we will talk about the budget process for governments and nonprofit entities. Government budgets, of course, have to be voted on by the membership within that government. Look at the financial condition and the results of operations. Determine our compliance with rules and regulations, and evaluate how effective we are with using our resources and providing services to our citizens. So federal government financial supports, we want to show budget integrity. All of this stuff is public information as part of the Information Act. We show operating performance, adequacy of systems and controls, stewardship, which is being good stewards of our resources, or showing that we are using other people's money well. And nonprofit financial reporting, making resource allocation decisions, so knowing how much resources we have available to us in order to determine how many services we can provide that year. and our ability to provide those services. Looking at stewardship also, so the use of resources, responsible use of resources, and management performance. And then looking at what are our economic resources, our obligations to perform, our net resources. So there are multiple kinds of ways that people can donate funding. And some of those donations become a permanent source of funding, while some are one-time donations and they get used differently, and we have to account for them differently. So an endowment fund versus a regular donation fund has different accounting treatment and rules. Minimum requirements for external financial reporting. We need a management discussion and analysis. So if you've taken other accounting classes, you've already seen that businesses also have to provide this management discussion and analysis, or called an MD&A. So this is just management saying that they agree with and are knowledgeable about everything that is in the financial statements. Then government-wide financial statements, we'll be learning how to create financial statements for government entities. They are very different than for private businesses and public businesses. Our fund financial statements, so these are looking at if we have endowment funds, if we have other kinds of funds, if we have a special fund to support the library or different things like that, that we have different statements for each one of those funds. Of course, chapters 2 through 12 are going to look pretty intensely at state governments and city governments. Any notes to the financial statements, and then any required supplementary information. Notes to the financial statements and supplementary information, those sections are very similar to what we would expect to see in an annual report for a business or an external reporting for a business. We have two different kinds of government financial statements. So government-wide financial statements, which is an overall view of the entire government, and then fund financial statements, which have more detailed financial information about different funds. Funds generally correlate with different services. So the police department, the fire department. We also have looking at library, if the library is under the city or the county. So looking at those different operational things. Okay. Remember, what we're looking for is accountability. Are we using our resources efficiently and effectively? What is the flow of our economic resources? And we use the accrual basis of accounting.